Have you ever noticed that when you try to be more laid back instead of being extremely uptight, you end up creating one disaster after another? Well, that's what Lincoln found out in the episode I'm going to talk about today. So join me as I, SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, bring you another retro review from past seasons of The Loud House. Cue the intro. Today's episode is No Guts, No Glory. In this episode, Lori is taken out of commission as the family babysitter because of her overbearing way of doing things, but chaos ensues when Lincoln is put in charge. The story starts off really good because it's understandable why Lori's younger siblings would secretly band together to tie her up and put an end to her drill sergeant way of maintaining order when their parents are gone. However, why would they put Lincoln, the middle child, in charge instead of someone older like Lenny or Luna? I can sort of see why they settled on Lincoln because he was the one who rallied everyone together for a more enjoyable time. Not to mention he was also encouraging everyone to do all the fun things Lori didn't want them to do. The problem with this choice of a babysitter, however, is the same one I have in the future episode Serial Offender, since the main conflict is pretty much the same between the two episodes. Still, I have to say the Serial episode is only slightly better than No Guts, because at least Lincoln was able to follow through on his mission and things did work out for him in the end despite what he had to go through. Similar to Serial Offender, No Guts presents all the sisters Lincoln is meant to look after as rowdy and out of control, including the ones older than him. If he was put in charge of only his younger sisters and maybe Lynn, this would actually make a lot more sense since little kids are more likely to act crazy if you can't keep them under control. I understand this isn't the first time Lincoln's older sisters have acted rowdy, and that's part of the collective nature of the series. Still, when looking at this episode in context of the situation, you would think the older sisters wouldn't be so quick to take on the mentality of their younger sisters and outright ignore the authority figure meant to look after them. But they do, and so does everyone else. They all had the same rebellious and spontaneous personality, completely blow off Lincoln's request to settle down, and they cause a massive amount of destruction around the house. This forces Lincoln to admit he can't handle being a babysitter the same way Lori can. Seriously, the girls just laughed off the idea of their brother putting his foot down, but the moment Lori put her foot down, immediately everyone changed course and started cleaning up the mess they made. They all conveniently fell in line because Lori was older and more assertive? Lincoln was being assertive too, and he's older than at least 5 of his sisters, and yet they wouldn't listen to him. But somehow they decided to stop acting up because Lori told them to? Unfreaking real. And speaking of Lori, she was just as bad as her other sisters, if not worse. While it was satisfying seeing her justifiably get what she deserved early in the episode, her strict and authoritarian behavior was just plain awful. I understand this is part of her character and it's not exactly a deviation from it. The problem is her need to be in control was amplified to the point where she became extremely unlikable and very smug when Lincoln proved to her how he couldn't handle being a babysitter. On top of that, she never learns a lesson on why her siblings would actually rebel against her in the first place. She never has a moment of reflection in realizing that you can't just be a total control freak and that maybe loosening up a bit can be a good thing for everyone. And before anyone says anything about the final few seconds, Lori mentioning how you can't say no all the time doesn't count as her learning her lesson because she never openly contemplates the error of her ways at any point throughout the episode. She doesn't think about her prior actions after she gets tied up and locked in her bedroom, and she certainly doesn't think about it after Lincoln sets her free. The biggest negative in all of this would be the takeaway message, which would be the only way to keep the peace is to be an overbearing dictator, and that's just a bad message all the way around. The only other thing I can say about this episode is that it's outright contradictive to the pilot episode Left in the Dark. Remember in the pilot how everyone was doing their own thing, not acting totally insane, and all the while Lori was the babysitter because the parents weren't home and she wasn't taking away everyone's ability to do anything fun? This begs the question on how and why this sudden shift in everyone's behavior from the first episode to this episode happened at all. Why did Lori have to suddenly become so authoritarian when she was nothing like that in the pilot? Everything was relatively calm and under control in the pilot given the same exact setup, the oldest sibling being left in charge. So why the sudden change in this episode? I don't know what could have instigated such a drastic change, but apparently Lori's authoritarian method of handling things worked out in the end and everything went back to normal. minus the dad finding the damaged golf club Lola used on Lincoln to take him out of commission. Overall, this episode is pretty bad. It made both Lori and Lincoln look like the worst kind of babysitters you could ever have, for different reasons of course. All the other sisters were written as the same, not in a good way mind you, and very immaturely for the teenagers, with the antagonist never reflecting upon the idea of how her actions may have been her own downfall as well as the downfall for everyone and everything else in the house. You're basically left with a story containing a bad takeaway message on what it means to be a babysitter. This is ultimately one of the most skippable episodes of season 1. With that said, I give No Guts, No Glory a 3.9 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of No Guts, No Glory. So I gotta ask, what did you guys think of this episode? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.